I love my fiancé, I always have, but suddenly something changed. We've been together for 6 years, built a life, planned a future. Our wedding is set. Everything should be perfect. But then she moved away, and nothing was the same. Our calls felt different. Our conversations got heavier. The love started to fade. Now, I'm stuck between what I feel and what I should do. Do all relationships go through this? Or am I just delaying the inevitable? I love my fiancé, but I don't know if I'm still in love, and what if I tell you, I'm not sure I want to get married anymore? Does that make me the bad guy? I met Camilla 6 years ago, and from the very first moment, I knew she was special. She had this quiet confidence, a way of making people feel at ease, and a smile that could light up any room. I was instantly drawn to her, and luckily she felt the same. Our relationship started off smoothly. We had our differences. She was more reserved, while I loved going out and socializing, but we balanced each other out. She never minded my nights out with friends, sometimes even joining me, and I made sure to respect her boundaries when she needed space. It was a partnership built on trust, or at least that's what I thought. 3 years in, we moved in together, and everything felt right. We complemented each other in all the right ways. Of course, Camilla had her struggles. She had been dealing with depression for as long as she could remember, but she managed it well, and I was always there to support her. Despite this, our home was filled with warmth, laughter, and shared dreams. When I proposed to her last year, it felt like the natural next step. She said yes without hesitation, and we started planning our wedding for November. Everything seemed to be falling into place. I imagined a future where we built a life together, where we continued growing as a team, where we overcame every challenge side by side. But then life threw us a curveball. Camilla got an incredible job offer in São Paulo, one she couldn't turn down. It was everything she had worked for, an opportunity that could set her career on a whole new path. And just like that, our once stable relationship was put to the test. When Camilla told me about the job offer, I was genuinely happy for her. It was a huge opportunity, and she had worked so hard for it. But then came the reality check. It was in São Paulo, miles away from where we had built our life together. At first, we discussed alternatives. Could she negotiate remote work? Could I move with her? But none of them were realistic. Her role required her to be physically present, and I had my own career, my own commitments. After a lot of back and forth, she made the decision. She would move, and we would make the long-distance relationship work. The first few weeks weren't so bad. We texted constantly, called each other every night, and made plans for me to visit as often as possible. But as time passed, things started to shift. Our conversations became less about us, and more about how difficult everything was for her. São Paulo was not what she had imagined. The cost of living was way higher than expected, and she struggled to adapt. Back home, she had always been surrounded by her family. Now, she was alone in a city that felt cold and overwhelming. I could hear the sadness in her voice, the exhaustion. I did my best to be there for her. I reassured her that things would get better, that she just needed time. But deep down, I felt helpless. I couldn't fix this for her, and I hated that. Still, I held on to the belief that we would get through it. After all, we had faced challenges before. This was just another hurdle, right? At first, Camilla's insecurities seemed understandable. She was in a new city, away from everything familiar, struggling to adjust. I reassured her constantly, trying to be patient. But soon the tone of our conversations changed. Before she moved, my social life had never been an issue. I had always been the type to go out with friends, grab a few drinks, unwind after a long day. She had even joined me on occasion and never seemed to mind. But suddenly, every time I went out, it became a problem. "Who are you with?" she would ask. "Where are you? How much have you had to drink?" At first, I brushed it off, thinking she was just feeling more vulnerable because of the distance, but the questions kept coming. If I didn't reply quickly enough, she'd send follow-ups. If I posted something on social media, she would dissect it. "Why didn't you tell me you were going there? Who's that in the background?" It was suffocating. I felt like I had to justify every single move I made. When I tried to talk to her about it, she got defensive. "I just miss you," she said. "I just want to feel included." I understood that. I really did. But instead of making me feel closer to her, it pushed me away. The freedom I had always enjoyed started to feel like something I had to apologize for. The tension built between us. Every call turned into a negotiation, me trying to convince her that she had nothing to worry about, her insisting that she wasn't accusing me of anything but just needed reassurance. I started dreading my phone buzzing, worried it would be another interrogation. And yet, I still told myself this was temporary. She just needed time to adjust, to feel more secure in this new reality. But deep down, I wondered, was this really about the distance? Or had something shifted between us that we couldn't undo? Camilla had always struggled with depression, but after moving, it became something else entirely. She was no longer just sad, she was drowning. At first, she tried to stay positive, telling me that she just needed time to adjust. But over the weeks, I watched her enthusiasm fade. She stopped talking about her job, barely left her apartment, and every call became heavier than the last. "I don't feel like myself anymore," she admitted one night. "I don't know why I even try." I knew she was struggling, and I wanted to be there for her. But our conversations, which had once been filled with jokes and shared excitement, had turned into something suffocating. Every call revolved around how miserable she felt, how hard everything was. I listened, comforted her, told her she wasn't alone, but no matter what I said, nothing seemed to help. I encouraged her to get therapy, to find something that might make her feel better. She always agreed, saying she would look into it, but she never did. And every time she pushed it off, I felt more frustrated, more powerless. I started noticing a shift in myself too. Where I once looked forward to talking to her, now I felt drained. I caught myself hesitating before answering her messages, sometimes ignoring them for a while just to breathe. And then came the guilt. What kind of person avoids their partner when she needs them the most? Still, I told myself that this was just another rough patch, that if I just held on, things would get better. But a part of me had already started to wonder, what if they didn't? I wanted to be strong for Camilla. I wanted to be the person she could rely on, the one who made things easier for her. But the truth was, I was exhausted. Every conversation felt like walking through a storm, trying to hold her up while barely keeping myself from collapsing. I wasn't just her fiancé anymore. I was her emotional crutch, the person who had to absorb all her pain. And no matter how much I tried, it never felt like enough. I started dreading our calls, not because I didn't care, but because I knew exactly how they would go. There was no lightness, no laughter, just an endless cycle of sadness and frustration. She would vent about how much she hated São Paulo, how lonely she felt, how nothing was going right. And I would listen, comfort her, tell her she wasn't alone. But what about me? What about how I felt? I was struggling too, feeling the weight of a relationship that was becoming less of a partnership and more of a responsibility. But every time I tried to bring up my own feelings, it felt selfish. How could I complain when she was the one truly suffering? So I kept it to myself. I buried the frustration, the exhaustion, the growing resentment, but it started to show in small ways. I took longer to reply to her messages. I made excuses to cut our calls short. I told myself it was just temporary, that she would get better, that I just needed to be patient. But deep down I felt something shifting and I was scared to admit it. I never stopped loving Camilla. That was never the issue. But one day I realized I wasn't in love with her anymore. It wasn't a sudden realization. It crept up on me slowly over months of exhaustion and unspoken resentment. I had always imagined love as this unshakable force, something that could withstand anything. But now, I wasn't so sure. I missed how things used to be. I missed the way we used to joke around, how effortless our conversations felt. Now, even the simplest dialogue felt heavy, like I was carrying both of our emotions on my back. I started feeling relief when she didn't message me, and that terrified me. I told myself it was just a phase, that long-term relationships had ups and downs. But if that was true, why did it feel like I was mourning something? I didn't want to break up. The thought of losing her completely was unbearable. She was still my best friend, the person I had built a life with. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore what I felt, or rather, what I didn't feel anymore. Some nights I would stare at my phone, reading her messages, feeling nothing but exhaustion. And then the guilt would hit. How could I love someone so much and still feel this distant? Was I a terrible person for even thinking this way? I kept waiting for something to change, for my feelings to shift back. But the more time passed, the more I realized I wasn't sure they ever would. Therapy had always been something I believed in. I had started my own sessions years ago, and they helped me process my emotions in ways I never could before. So when Camilla's depression worsened, the first thing I did was encourage her to go back. She always agreed in theory. "Yeah, I know I need to," she'd say. "I'll look into it soon." But soon never came. Every time I brought it up, she had an excuse. "I'm too busy with work. I don't have the energy right now. It's just a rough phase, I'll get through it." But the rough phase never ended. It was frustrating. I wanted to be understanding, but I also felt helpless. I was doing everything I could to support her, but nothing was changing because she wasn't taking the steps to help herself. I knew therapy wouldn't magically fix everything, but at least it would be something. And then a thought crept into my mind. What if I gave her an ultimatum? What if I told her that I couldn't keep doing this unless she actually committed to getting help? It felt cruel, like I was putting conditions on my love. But wasn't love supposed to be a two-way street? I kept going back and forth in my head. Would it be selfish to demand this from her? Or was it necessary to save not just our relationship, but my own mental well-being? I still hadn't made a decision, but one thing was becoming clearer every day. I couldn't keep doing this forever. The guilt was eating me alive. I knew that love wasn't always easy, that sometimes you had to show up for your partner even when it was hard. But at what point did supporting someone turn into losing yourself? Every time I thought about giving Camilla an ultimatum, I felt like the worst person in the world. She was struggling, she was in pain. How could I, the person who promised to stand by her, even consider pulling away? What if my love was supposed to be the one thing that helped her get through this? But then I would think about how I felt, how I had been feeling for months now. The exhaustion, the distance, the way my heart didn't race when she called anymore. And I couldn't ignore the truth. I wasn't happy. Was I supposed to just accept that? Was this what commitment meant? Sticking it out even when I felt like I was drowning? I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. Would she do the same for me? If I were the one spiraling, refusing to get help, expecting her to carry the weight of my emotions, would she stay? Would she sacrifice her own happiness for mine? I wanted to believe she would. But even if she did, would that be fair? Would that be love? I still didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I was running out of time to figure it out. I kept thinking about the promises we made to each other, the life we had envisioned, the future we had planned. Marriage wasn't just about love. It was about commitment, about standing by each other through every storm. But could you stay committed to someone when you no longer felt like the same person who made those promises? I had always believed love was enough, that as long as you loved someone, you could get through anything. But now I wasn't sure. Was love still love if it felt like an obligation? If it drained you instead of lifting you up? I knew Camilla loved me, and I knew I loved her. But the way I loved her had changed. It wasn't the kind of love that made me excited for the future. It was the kind that made me feel responsible, like I owed her something for all the years we had spent together. I thought about our wedding, about standing in front of our friends and family, making vows I wasn't sure I could keep. Could I really look her in the eyes and promise a lifetime when I wasn't even sure about the next few months? I hated myself for even thinking about it. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had to change. The only question was, did that mean saving the relationship or finally letting go? I don't know if I'm making the right choice. Maybe this is just a phase, something every long-term relationship goes through. Maybe I'm being selfish, letting exhaustion cloud my judgment instead of fighting for the person I've spent 6 years building a life with. But what if I'm not? What if staying means slowly resenting her more and more? What if forcing myself to hold on does more damage than letting go ever could? I keep asking myself, am I a bad person for feeling this way? for wanting her to get help, not just for herself, but for me too, for craving a relationship that feels like love instead of weight. I haven't made a decision yet. Maybe I'll sit down with her, lay everything out, and we'll find a way to fix this. Or maybe I'll realize that some things can't be fixed, no matter how much love is there. All I know is that I never wanted to feel this way. So tell me, am I the asshole for loving my fiancée but no longer being in love with her?